Okay, so we're recording. So welcome everyone. This is the other Ask Me Anything with Phil. On this time is going to be focused on source code topics. So there's a document in the event, so definitely jump on that and add questions as you think of them. So to get started, yeah, I'll just jump over directly to Justin's. I have a couple on my backup on my pocket. I'll throw them out if we're having a silent time. But Justin, take it away. Voice your question, please.
Sure. Okay. So the first one there is for someone who is just onboarding, how would they best go about familiarizing themselves with source code?
I guess it depends on the person. For me, I just like looking at code. I guess it's just essentially just read the code as much as possible. The diff stuff is there's just a lot of stuff in there. So there's probably stuff you'll never look at until you actually work on a feature.
Gotcha. So is there, I know it's kind of weird to say like, is there any director or anything in particular they should look at? Or is there any like naming convention perhaps that will kind of say this demarcates this as being part of source code?
No. That's a question. No.
Fair question.
The diff,
you're on your own.
the diff stuff, I think it's just in the diffs folder essentially. Then I think there's a MR notes, and then we also would use the notes one, which would be for the discussions, but that one's also shared with issues.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Cool.
Just go crazy on them folders.
Just read.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's important as well that a lot of these have been evolving over time. So some of the part of source code are still in the HAML era. Other parts of the source code are already in the Vue and Vuex era as well.
Sure.
So definitely tread carefully.
We can move on to point 2. What would you fix or change about source code if you had the time to do it from a user or a UX perspective?
We just really need to fix the performance of merge requests.
Okay.
I always get scared of whenever we add a single line of code in there because I'm always scared that we'll end up getting bad performance again. So we really need to come up with a good strategy and how to actually get the performance of the whole page running nice.
Okay. Forms. And the kind of the follow up to that is around like a tech debt perspective, and I think you kind of touched on it already. You're concerned about performance in particular.
Yeah, I think when we sort of started the merge request refactor into Vue, we didn't really consider that, okay, well, some merge requests could have thousands of lines of code, thousands of discussions at the same time. So you don't really think of these things when you're refactoring it.
Okay.
So yeah, it would be nice to not have to worry about them performance issues, and you can just write code and it'd be okay.
Yeah, one of the tips I can share there as well is, and Phil, sorry for jumping in. I'm just trying to top off with a couple of tips. Is that there's a couple of test projects that we sometimes use and clone locally that have like very large merge requests for you to test locally with 15,000 changes. So I'm going to link that project that you can import locally into your local environments to test out those scenarios locally while you're developing the features. Because sometimes it's good enough to just catch, oh crap, this just takes like 2 minutes to load. So I'll link there in the document.
Very cool. Okay, that kind of goes hand in hand with the next couple of questions I had, which was any debugging tips, or actually I'll skip ahead to the one past that, which is any tips for setting up local data and developing against them. That's one of the big stumbling blocks I often have when I first get an issue is queuing up a project that has the right amount of stuff in it to do whatever I'm working on.
Yeah, I don't really have any tips. Mine sort of, I think my DDK's lasted since I started at GitLab. So mine sort of just evolved over time to have all this data in that I've needed.
I see.
So I don't really have any tips on how to set it up all up really, except for the project that Andrew just said. They're nice ones to look at. But even then, it's still nice to have. We should probably look at getting some seed data in there so we can have large diffs with large discussions, so you don't have to worry.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the tip there is get a hold of your computer.
Essentially, I'll just send my computer around to everyone. You can all just play on the
There you
hard
go.
drive.
Okay. That's really all I had.
Okay. So I just added there the link to the project I have. I cloned it from Lucas' IP project, but apparently has cleaned up that project. So basically, it has a bunch of branches already prepared with 1,000 changes and on above. So you just have to actually create the merge request on your own. But that would be a tip: is as you're preparing test data to test your features on a couple of projects, if you do that in GitLab.com or just some other Git private repository or whatever you want to do, it'll be easier to then, once you wipe out all your GDK, to recover that situation that you definitely want to keep from being destroyed. Because if you're doing it very locally, like preparing, oh, I'm going to open a merge request and do all these comments manually, it will be gone by the next time you're going to do a reset to your database, and we all know that will happen. So so definitely it's good to have some of those things outside of the local environment, so you can just like quickly pull that in, or just have snippets of Rails consoles commands that you can whip up and run those to generate those informations, and just keep that in your back pocket. So I'll go on to Samantha. Voice your question.
Sure. Phil, got a question. What are some common mistakes you see people make with source code?
I'm just gonna. This is the one thing I'm going to keep talking about. It's the merge request performance. I think people misunderstand how bad certain changes can actually make the performance. Even just like adding one extra property, it can cause kind of big issues with the rendering of it. We need to be a little careful. But that's all I'm going to keep talking about is merge request performance. It's going to sound so bad. That's the only my main concern.
Can you expand on that? I'm not entirely following that.
Yeah, so I guess probably easier if we explain from the start. So when we request the diffs, we request every single diff line from the backend, and we just render it straight onto the page. And with Vue, there are some little strategies in there. We're doing request out of callback, which will wait until the browser actually gives us free time to render a new file, but we could probably go a bit deeper and change that per line. And this was to help because we were seeing that like actually rendering, not even fetching, just rendering the diffs was taking seconds of the browser. So it would take seconds to actually fetch the data and then seconds to actually render it. Oh, there you go. Yeah, that one. Yeah, so this sets up sort of queue. Now I didn't write this code, so I'm just reading it as I could see it. Tim wrote this code, but essentially just sets up a queue, and each file gets added into this queue. And when the browser gives us a bit of free time, we can then say, okay, well, listen, the browser can actually render this. It gives us a little bit of performance. It sort of frees up a bit of free time, and we can hope that it can render in time. But yeah, does that answer your question? I hope so.
Yeah, a little bit. I guess I haven't touched too much on that yet, so I'm still kind of processing it.
Yeah, I think I can add some bit of information there. I do want Phil to cover one specific scenario. He worked on a feature and he had these performance concerns, and I think that'll be easier for him to explain. But since we're on this subject, and I helped him with this particular improvements, I'll give some historical context, and then I'll explain a little bit further of this code. So when we did the merge request refactor from Haml to Vue, we bumped into those problems, like the merge request that had 100 discussions or thousands of lines of changes, they would block the browser. The browser would just hang up. And that was because we were relying on Vue to just take care of, like, we just update the state with 1,000 of stuff that came from the server, and we hope that Vue would render it properly. The problem is that the browser can only do so much, and it was hanging because we're just asking them to render thousands and thousands of lines. Each line has a handful of components on that own line, so that just added up in terms of time and just locked the browser for considerable amount of time. And this was the approach that team came up with, which is kind of having a queue of diffs to be rendered. And this is kind of the logic where using the request idle callback, which basically just runs this whenever the browser is ready and it's not like crying for help. It will run then to set the discussions. So this is just right there. It's kind of like a more robust set timeout to release the control of the browser thread. And then you can start setting the discussions on the state. And then when you're about to render it, basically all discussions have a little flag, like render it here, that is false in the beginning. So you're going to have to incrementally turn that flag on, and if it's on, then you'll be able to render it there. How you do that is then you will commit those mutations using request animation frame, and then you use request idle callback to continue the rest of the queue. So that's sort of the explanation of the concern we had for rendering large merge requests along like the whole page. But Phil, maybe we can now switch to talk about the particular concerns you had when building the feature, which that was going to be my follow-up question anyway. So I'm gonna add that to the document, which is recently you worked on a simple expand full file button in the merge request diffs tab. That's a simple button that you click and it just expands the whole file. It looked like a simple feature, and I saw, and I was there in the beginning, and I saw how Phil was concerned about exactly that performance part, and he had a very similar approach about this. So Phil, do you want to talk a little bit about what was the concerns that you took around this this part, especially to make the rendering of a large file performant?
Yep. So on diffs, hold on, it's probably best to open a link which Andrew very kindly gave me because I can't run the GTK and Zoom at the same time. Share, where are we? Desktop 1. Cool. Can we see this? Hope so.
We can.
Yeah.
Natalia, we're using your MR because I just saw it recently happening. So Phil, go ahead.
So we have this very nice little button here that request the full file content straight in the diff. So we request it, just request the actual content, and we wait like a year because the team.yaml file is huge, and then it starts to render each of the lines. So you see the little loading sphere at the bottom. Now we could just render this file completely, but with this one specifically, it's like 10,000 lines, whatever it is, and you just see the browser just start to die, and you still see it takes like maybe, in this case, it probably maybe like 5-6 seconds to actually render. So we did the same sort of thing of the request idle callback. So this is the main actual UX action. The data is the data that we get back from the backend, which just contains an array of lines to both, just an array of lines, which we then convert here. So we converted the highlighted diff lines, which is the inline diff view, and then parallel. And then we start to work out, okay, well, we only really care about doing this incremental rendering for the diff view that we can actually see. So we work out which one we're viewing. If we're viewing the parallel one, we only care about incremental rendering the inline, and the other way around.
Phil, sorry to interrupt. Can you go over the terminology a little bit? I'm slowly getting it, but maybe it'll be helpful for someone else watching. Like, can we talk about what are we talking about in terms of parallel line? What are we referring to as to diffs? I think these terminology will help the next person so they don't have to go through it like me.
Yeah, sure. So the code, which I've always found a bit weird, is we call it highlighted diff lines, which actually equals inline. I would probably guess we should probably name it to inline, so it makes a little bit more sense. And then parallel diff lines, which is what everyone should be using because it just looks nicer, is when you get the split view like this. That's side by side. So yeah, so we work out the current one.
And this is just the individual lines, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we work out the one that we're currently viewing. In my case, it would be the parallel, and the hidden one would be the inline view. We can just instantly just set the ones because Vue's never going to render them, so we don't really care. And then we get into this bit of logic here, which just starts to get a bit more confusing. So we work out, okay, well, we know we can render maybe like 500 lines. I think this equals, 500 lines in maybe like 500 milliseconds, which is, it's not great, but it's okay, and we can deal with it. So if it's more than 500, we'll go into the incremental rendering. If not, we can just instantly just set the lines, and we can wait maybe 500 or so milliseconds for the browser to actually render it. And then this is where it gets a bit more confusing. So we do the old request hour callback, and that's just a mocked function, a mocked method that we can do in the tests, which is request hour callback. And then this is where we do the callback. So request hour callback in the callback function gives the time, which can give the time remaining, which is the browser says to you, okay, well, you've got maybe like a couple of milliseconds to actually do it before I need you to take over. So we can work out, we can do some checks there. If it's more than that, we can just quit out of it and wait for another hour of the callback if we still need to render lines. And then in this while loop, we'll start to render each line one after the other until eventually all the lines are nicely rendered and the browser doesn't freeze, except it might freeze a little bit because I'm pretty sure the styles are probably not the greatest either. The browser actually has to paint it. Does all that make sense? So, Andre, have I missed anything?
No, that was basically what I wanted you to cover. And then just so that you all understand, like if it's a small file, like you won't even notice the incremental rendering. But if it's a large file like TeamYAML, you definitely see it, and you definitely see that it's progressively rendering, so you know what's happening. And it's like when you are loading such a large file, you're kind of expecting it to like take a long while, but you can start doing other stuff on the browser and it will react. That's the important part, because if you did it all at once, you'd be locked for several minutes.
Yeah, and because it's using request hour callback, the browser just lets us know how much time we have. And if we don't have any time left, it won't give us any. So we're free.
Yeah. Questions about that, Samantha? Was it?
No, I think
clear?
that's good. I don't know if we have time since you have that screen going on. I wonder if we could get an overview of the structure of source code. Do we have time for that? I wonder if that might be too long of a question.
Maybe if we have a specific area about what we want to learn, because we can definitely take that like overall view, but it's such a large app that if we have any particular areas that we'd like to see, and again, some of those might be just clarified by looking at the state or the Vuex. One thing we're doing, which is sometimes hard to grasp at first sight, is that we're getting a lot of responses from the server, and you're just grabbing those and attaching to the state. And Phil, correct me if I'm wrong. So sometimes you don't see that in the code itself, that we're just mimicking the structure that comes from the server and loading it on the state. Sometimes we're doing some conversions that Phil highlighted there somewhere along the overview. But there are some things that are in the state that come directly from the server. Sometimes it can cause problems. Going ahead with GraphQL, we're far more protected from that. But yeah, right now, all the source code base is still using Vuex and not GraphQL, just regular endpoints of the APIs we have.
Is there any part, Phil, that you think is super tricky that we need to watch out for?
There's no like single point really. Just whenever you're adding data into the merge request, anything to do with merge request, just be very careful. It's probably not as bad as I make it out. It's probably like much better now, but it just like I get flashbacks.
And rightly so. Yeah, there was a time where we were doing, like Phil was doing fixes and improvements and stuff like that, and we were doing manual performance testing and just comparing master to the feature branch, and some of the improvements were significant. But at the time, the paranoid in us were always double testing everything, making sure that we got regular, like down to the performance analysis of the rendering. We do have some work being done by the quality team that in the reviews app, they're using some models of MRs to make sure that performance don't regress. I'm not entirely sure of the state of that, but that has been done by the quality. So there are some I'll need to check the state of that. But that was from that work. Like we started doing that manually. But right now the tips are be vigilant about performance and just having those sort of projects set up in your local environment to play around with the MR with 15,000 lines instead of just 12 makes a huge difference when you're developing these features, because we're not going to solve performance issues by accident. There is a deliberate action towards fixing those performance issues. But as long as we don't make them worse, it's good enough for the daily work, and we'll be scheduling performance improvements as we go along the line to make sure that we just can handle whatever size the MR is. But yeah, there's no one specific. I agree, Phil. I think the most important part, if I may, it was this particular part of incrementally rendering stuff on MRs that we just covered, because that apart from that is just figuring out the Vuex structure, and that's just a regular Vuex app. Make sense? Cool. I think we had other questions.
I snuck a clarification in there while you were talking. Phil, did you have any ideas around making the performance better? Is it reducing watcher count, maybe more of a static render? Somebody had mentioned GraphQL earlier because that fixes everything now.
Not off the top of my head. We always moan about the JavaScript part of Diff, but we should probably look at the CSS as well. Like the CSS that actually is there isn't great. Yeah, that should probably be looked at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Can we cover? We talked a little bit about testing. Can you kind of talk about like how you go about testing for someone who don't have a lot of testing experience? How do you, when you have something, how do you decide what to test and your kind of execution plan?
So when you say testing, are we talking about automated tests or just me clicking around in the browser?
Oh no, not you clicking around the browser.
Okay. I just literally you look at the code that you've written and think, okay, well, how can I test this code and make sure it doesn't actually break in the future? There will inevitably be tests that you miss. That is totally okay. It just happens. You're not going to be able to write tests for every single case possible. It's just whenever that case comes up, whenever there's a regression or a bug, it's just to make sure that you got a test that actually covers that bug to make sure it doesn't happen in the future.
Do you have any suggestion on resources that are good reading that has helped you?
No. I've just learned really through tests that I've written at GitLab, so I'm pretty. The documentation with the GitLab testing is probably okay. The front end is probably not the best of guides. I don't think it's up to the size of the back end one. The back end one, like with the RSpec tests. But yeah, just write tests. That's probably the best way.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, the more tests you write, the better you'll get at that. And I think one important part that you touched there is exactly the point of if you're fixing a bug, write something to make sure that it doesn't come back. And through there, you'll have the experience. I want to pull Natalia's question because it's been there a while.
Yeah, it's actually
so
about
you want
merge.
to voice your question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most tricky part of the source is actually merge request widget, and I'm happy with the shape it has right now because every time I open it, I just want to burn it to the ground and run and fresh.
Yep, so I'm exactly the same. I think we were looking at adding GraphQL in. That was like the first app that we were going to change into GraphQL, and that was like over a year ago. So it was nice to actually do that, and the dog is going bananas at something.
Yeah, I'll talk over that. So the merge request widget was the first, but at the time it was not as large as it is now. I think it just grew up from other stages jumping on it and adding more stuff. But is there anything particularly that you had planned for the merge request widget to break it down in terms of architecture, in terms of tricks to make it a little bit more manageable, or just rewriting the whole thing?
We should probably just rewrite the whole thing. But we have the GraphQL endpoint. It already exists, so we could just use that. The problem is that there's just a lot of different states and different views inside of it that you actually just need to make sure all that works. I think there's probably tests that could roll in. I hope.
That'll be the first step, making sure we have tests that cover that all scenarios.
Yeah. But yeah, I totally want to bet it to the ground.
Thanks for that. And it is one of the parts that, even though it's a source code, there's a lot of parts of the MR widget that is shared amongst other groups. But there's some discussion about what can we do about it in terms of restructuring it in a way that is scalable, not just in terms of code, but also in terms of UX. Because right now, it just kept being added, and at the beginning, probably Phil remembers that it wasn't like it didn't cover even half the screen. But with stuff being added now, it's useful information, and it's still a summary of the entire information we have. But I think that's a lesson, probably, Phil. Like, do you have any examples of things like this that was evolving across multiple stages that didn't end up in the merge request widget state that you remember?
No, I think it's just the widget. Most of the places is sort of isolated, which is a merge request widget that can touch different parts.
Right. Yeah. So we'll probably need to address that in the near future to create some structure on how people contribute to that. And that's going to be an UX effort, but also we'll be ready to rewrite that. So Natalia, I'll pull you in when it's time to rewrite that part. Great. Thanks.
Did Natalia say she wants to do it, or she just wants to be a benefactor of it having been done?
No. I was just complaining about merge request widget because it was actually, I think, my first deliverable at GitLab, where I found like a huge bug with mutating props, and it was exactly merge request widget. So I have a right to complain.
I remember that. Cool. More questions? No? Okay, so I'll throw one in. Just a second. So for those who don't know and haven't been seeing, Phil has been working on a refactoring of the file browser repository tree thing that we have into View, and that was one of the situations where we had a HAML code base. We moved it to View for performance reasons, because we wanted to make it more snappy to navigate through the whole tree, and the tasks were broken down, and I'll link to the epic here in just a second. But my question to Phil then, because he was working on that, did you have any lessons, because it was particularly an up-to-date migration from HAML all the way to GraphQL? So were there any lessons there through that path? Anything you'd like to highlight, or was it easy? Was it easier to do that than other refactors you've seen in the past with not using GraphQL?
Yeah, it's like the easiest refactors we've ever done, because it's just essentially what it does is render data. There's no like interactive parts. The biggest lesson is that everybody already knows that GraphQL is like the best thing ever. It made it so easy. And if you would ever need to add a GraphQL feature, I would just look at the backend code. The backend code is super simple to understand. There's not really much complex in there. So yeah, if you ever want to contribute to GraphQL, please just do it. Because everything should be GraphQL.
Yeah, and in particular, there was this one scenario of one thing that you identified as missing in your implementation. Do you want to tell how you identified that? Talking about the signatures.
So this is one of the cases where we actually had tests that caught something. So on the actual commit widget part of it, there is the GCP, GP, whatever it is, signatures, some kind of signature that gets rendered. That's the one that gets rendered. I didn't really consider this because it doesn't exist on my local, so I wasn't really looking into it. But yeah, the test actually caught this. So the test went red when I turned the feature flag on. So yeah, we can be fairly confident that there's tests for certain things. And I haven't even checked E yet. There's probably something in E that I've missed, because there always is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, the lesson is there. The tests definitely help us in this refactors. And thank you, Phil, for raising that point of the backend, because one of the problems we had with the merge request refactor was that we didn't do that. And at a certain point, we just had to have a sync up session with Dawa where he walked us through the backend logic that it had implemented for the Hamel views. And then we just like, all right, do we have this in the front end? Do we have this in the front end? Shit, we don't have this in the front end. Oh, we didn't have that bit in the front end, so we had to rewrite that. But the back end is a great, because if we're writing something in Hamel, it's been sitting there for sometimes years. And if we haven't had problems, we definitely want to make sure that the refactor will migrate that. And even if we don't know how to read Ruby, either we grab a backend or it's usually in the Hamel logic. It's easy enough to follow. But yeah, thanks for that tip, Phil. It's definitely useful.
And if you ever get stuck with anything in the back merge request or even anything to do with GitLab itself, Dawa is like the best person to talk to if you like knows every single little thing.
That's true. Absolutely. I thought I had another follow-up question. Anybody has any questions about this?
I think I do have like a general question about kind of your time at GitLab, Phil. Like, what are some of the things that in hindsight you'll tell yourself starting at GitLab?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know. So much has happened. So, I mean, I worked on Diff View into GitLab. I worked on issue boards. I remember making a change on the issue form or the merge request form, and you actually couldn't submit merge requests for like a week or two whilst we were trying to redeploy. Yeah, there's nothing really that I would change in hindsight. It's just you just learn these things over time. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard something yesterday or read something yesterday on Twitter. It might be useful for this case where a junior developer talks to a senior developer and asks for help, and the senior developer answers, and the junior thinks, "Oh my God, he's so smart," and the senior thinks, "Oh my God, I've made that mistake so many times," and that's what Phil is saying. That like you learn as you go. There are definitely truth there.
But like it's totally okay to make these mistakes. Like so, I made the mistake of breaking the merge request form, and like you just think to yourself, "Oh gosh, what have I done?" And like it does seem super bad at the time, but like in a week, everyone just forgets about it, and everyone goes on with their lives.
Yeah, I would grab that particular example, Phil, to highlight one very good characteristic that you have, which is it's okay to break those things, and especially we have the knowledge of the stuff we were working on. As long as we jump on it and we put a fix up and we try to get some reaction to it, was working amazingly with you, and I think that's something that we should definitely take as an example, because it's okay to break things, but we will react quickly. We jump on it, we fix them, write a few tests to make sure that they don't come back, and send it on its way, and then crisis averted. We're in a far better position now with feature flags, where we can just turn off that feature if it's just like just launched. So in a far better position now to just mitigate those risks. But I think that's something that you had as a discipline whenever something spun off, either yours or other people's in the team work, a regression or something, you were very quick to jump on those, because sometimes it's just a one-line fix if you know about the code, and reviewing code is also a good part of being aware of the code being shipped. And that would be my follow-up question. You reviewed a lot of MRs while at GitLab. So we have several people on the call and more people watching this, and some of them are already maintainers, others are aspiring to become maintainers, some of them are already trainee maintainers. So I was wondering, tips for reviewing code that you felt were useful for you, and of course it varies, but did you have any particular discipline, any particular habits about reviewing code that you might want to share?
Not really. Yeah, well, for me, I prefer to start my day off reviewing code. It's probably a bit different for me. It's like my normal day, I'd wake up and I've got like maybe 10 different merge requests assigned to me. So I always like to get the boring stuff out of the way. If it's not boring, reviewing code isn't boring. It's enjoyable. It's something different. But you just want to get out of the way whilst so your mind's all fresh. And normally the ones the dog doesn't bark. So it's nice to get that out of the way. yeah, a lot of the stuff I've just learned over time are things to look out for. You get used to things that always come up. That was the question.
Yeah. I because some people have their own habits and it changes from person to person, but it's just useful to hear what you used to do. Like that thing about having at the start of the day a slot for that just creates a habit of always being trimming down the pile, because if you postpone it for later, then you're going to be blocking other people. I felt like that was a very tiny detail of your approach to reviewing merge requests, but it was effective because you were always on top of things and always pushing things forward, even though you probably didn't get through all of it in one go. I guess there was days that you probably just skipped and moved things to the next day. I'm not sure, but you were always very effective there.
A follow-up to that. Do you have anything, is there like a pattern or anything you did more, I guess, technically around reviewing? Like, do you start with pulling down the branch and running it locally? Do you start with reading through the issue? Do you start with just skimming through the changes they made? Anything on those lines?
Normally I'll start going through the code, and you get like a point in the code and you realize I have no idea what this feature is meant to be doing. And at that point I go back and actually look at the issue, which you should probably do first, but I never do, and I always forget to. Yeah, and then eventually I just go through the code, create all the comments, and then eventually all the comments get resolved, and you think, okay, well, I'll just test it in the local now that my comments have been resolved. It's always the last thing I do.
So you kind of look for the low-hanging fruit of obvious issues in the code first, and then let that guide you towards something that might need a deeper look.
Yeah, but normally if you get, so I'm probably a bit bad doing this, but normally I like to hang on the UX review to testing it in the browser, because I mean they're the ones that know how the feature should work. They're the one how it should look.
What was that again?
So yeah, so it depends on the feature. Yeah, so some features we should assign to UX to review it. So I like to think that they've reviewed it in the browser quite well and know how it works and caught bugs that way. Yeah, so I probably don't run it in the browser as much as I should. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I guess it's okay to admit it.
Following up on that, is there like something in a merger that you've seen that you thought was really, really cool? Any instances?
Any what, sorry?
Any instances of seeing a merge request where you go, oh, this is a cool merge request?
Oh gosh. Off the top of my head, I don't know. There's been like thousands of merge requests. I don't know. Sorry.
What about, what can we do? Because you're a maintainer. What can we do when we're submitting a merge request that that makes it easier for you to do your job? Are there anything?
Yeah, so the best advice that I can give yourself is, and it was what I was given way back when I started, was to always review your code yourself first and try to find any issues that you find. And eventually over time, you'll get into the same mindset of how the maintainers think, and you'll start to catch on to them. Because I mean, over time, you just naturally just learn, okay, well, the maintainers normally pick up on this point, I'll just do it differently next time. But yeah, always review the code yourself first.
Okay, that's the good stuff. What about the bad stuff? Are there anything that we should avoid?
Oh no, I don't know. Just there's nothing I would say avoid. You just write the code you do, and then the maintainer will review or comment on it. And if like the code that you wrote and you feel like it's the best way to write the code, feel free to like disagree with a reviewer or a maintainer. You should totally do that if you think the code that you've written is the best. And then normally a discussion happens, and then hopefully it gets resolved somewhere. And if it doesn't get resolved, go to Andre, and then he'll resolve it for you.
Yeah, that's true. I really enjoy this point, Phil, because sometimes people take the feedback that they got from the merge request as mandatory, and sometimes there's something we miss as we review code, and sometimes it's not obvious exactly the side effects. And with Frontend, we know that there's a few things that CSS or not CSS that will make a big change in the end result, or just cross-browser compatibility, that is not obvious. So if you're absolutely sure that this is the right approach, and you feel like the maintainer is missing something, speak up. And in GitLab, like, we'll always assume good intention. So keeping an open communication is useful, is critical to get that discussion in a healthy state, that you're just making sure that this was considered. I was doing this because of that. Do you think I still need to change? And then that discussion will just solve itself on its own. But yeah, if it doesn't, get back to me and I'll help. I'll just throw a dice in the air. More comments, more questions.
I was just gonna say if there was any like common mistake that you see quite often.
Oh, my common mistake. The common mistake. I'll go to common mistake, and then I'll go to my common mistake, and you'll see how stupid my common mistake is. The common mistake is, it's probably not so bad now that we have links in place. But a while ago, when we were trying to translate, you'd always find that strings wouldn't actually have the translation methods, and like I would always forget them, and Felipe would always tell me to add them, and I would never remember for the next merge request. But the common mistake that I always add, and it's the most stupidest thing, I always leave console logs in. Always. And I didn't even know why I leave them in. They just always stay in. So yeah.
We've all done that. It's part of life. But yeah, the linters definitely help there.
Yeah, there was a time before we didn't even have any linters in place. And then Winnie, when he wasn't an employee, added them as a community contribution. It was like, maybe, I think it was Coffee Lint when we were using CoffeeScript. And then we hired Winnie, and then I'm pretty sure he added ESLint.
Cool. So we still have a bit of time. I was going to ask, do you remember, what would you say was the most complex feature you worked on under the source code?
Under source code?
Yeah. I know that you worked on a bunch of domains, the web IDE and other stuff, but source code, what can you think of one particular feature that you thought, all right, this took a while?
Not really, no. Well, I guess if we go quite a while back, so the very first ever view feature we added is the resolving diff discussions and diff comments. But because you sort of like adding in Vue into a jQuery app, which was rendering an Ajax call, it was like creating some super hacky Vue code that like you just don't even want to look at now. So that was kind of complex. And you'd always have to try and catch these edge cases that you didn't even think about. And I worked with Dower on that one. And I'd always finish for the day and I'd be like, yeah, I've fixed everything. I've fixed all Dower's comments. And you come on the next day and he's created like over 20 different comments of cases that I didn't think about.
Yeah,
so
that's Dower.
Very complex.
That's good. And it's a great example because it talks about a far distant era, but we still have to deal with those kind of edgy.
Yeah, that we never have to go back to.
Famous last words. So that segues a little bit to my next question. And I know that, so you worked and you gave a very helpful hand on the batch comments, on merge request reviews. I was the engineer working on that feature, and you came along and you helped structure along the split of the code between E and C, and it was amazing, by the way. Thank you. But that leads me to my question, which is, what would be the features you would give us a heads up to about the things that are available on CE that are available on EE that are not available on CE? Because sometimes, and we've been bitten about this in recent past, where we work on a feature on CE, it's working great, but then we forget that there's something touching this code base or happening on EE, especially, for example, the batch comments, because it's more prominent now on the source code. Is there any other, apart from the batch comments that only exist in EE, that you think about on the source code we need to look out for? That even going back into the old code, even going back to HAML views, stuff that could creep up on you when you're not unexpected on the CE side?
Maybe I guess the only other thing that I can think of that would be in ours, the source code, would be file lock and folder locks. You can lock specific files and folders from being edited. I guess this issue doesn't become a big issue anymore when we have the single code base. Because in theory, the test should catch these before it gets merged into EE.
Yeah, but you still have to test the feature with the license enabled. So still valid heads up.
In theory, the test should catch you. In theory. And the dog just is not happy today.
Those are joyful barks.
Yeah, it doesn't sound joyful to me.
So a generic question. So out of all the areas that we have in source code, in the file repository, creating merge requests, compare views, what would you say is the area that you feel could use some of our attention in terms of refactoring, in terms of bringing it up to speed, or code that you've just been reviewing and you're feeling that is just old code, it needs to be updated? Do you have any examples like that spring to mind?
Snippets could be this massive thing that we could do.
Snippets is the editor, but I understand the confusion.
I mean, we can still. Well, if we take out the source code there,
we can bring it in.
This cool feature.
What would be in specific snippets? What would be?
I mean, snippets could be super powerful, though, couldn't they? Because I mean, if you pair it with the web IDE, you sort of get code sandbox essentially, or even CodePen. Yeah. So I think we should nick snippets for source code.
I'll bring that over with the product. But yeah, that's definitely something on our minds, and we definitely want to make that happen and improve that. Out of those areas that I mentioned, did you see any activity in merge requests regarding other groups working with compare views? Because when you're putting in a new merge request, down below there's a compare view of the two branches, and that's still not refactored into View. So is there anything like that you've seen, like old code being touched recently that falls into this category?
No, but that's a good point actually. We should probably refactor commits into the View app. So that's just a single way to render diffs.
So can I
through the hammer way?
Why would you say that was the one? Like, is there anything that you feel we could integrate between the two views? Between the two?
Rendering commits is technically just rendering the merge request diffs. So it would be good to have it as like a single way to actually render these things.
Yeah.
So the moment if you wanted to update a diff, you probably have to update the commits view as well as the merge request diffs.
Or don't update it in breaks.
Yeah, so you should get on their schedule on that one, Andre.
Yeah. I'm asking, but this is like more to give visibility. Samantha, do you want to voice your questions?
Now that we're going to general questions, I was wondering if you have any favorite programming books.
No, I don't read. Like, I'm the worst. I buy books. I bought the Game of Thrones book to try and read it, and I got through like a chapter, and I just gave up. So I just don't read.
Do you prefer articles or videos or tutorials?
Just good old Twitter, and then I just find stuff through Twitter.
Okay, favorite accounts that we should follow?
Oh gosh, off the top of my head, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, what about easier one? Favorite.
Wait, no, I know one. Everyone should follow Sarah Trasner. She's like insane. Yeah.
What was it? I'm just
Sarah
writing it there.
Sarah Edo.
Oh yeah. Okay, I know that one. What about do you have any favorite plugin? I'm guessing you're using VS Code as well?
Yes.
Let's talk about.
I always show my favorite one at the moment.
Let's do it.
So I've got the nice one where you can have like the nice colors around it, which is called Peacock. So you get all these nice little colors that change it on, and I love that. But my favorite one at the moment is the bracket colorizer. So it changes the bracket colors based on the how far nested they are. So it's like blue, then yellow, and then pink. So I love that one at the moment. It makes it look like
What's
a
the
rainbow.
name of that one? Is it just highlighter, I think?
Where are we? Bracket
Oh,
pair
that one.
horizon. Apparently I don't have it in that one yet. Bracket pair horizon 2. Just 'cause it makes it look like a nice little rainbow. And with the nice pair around it, it looks really nice.
Cool.
I think we should do a show and tell of extensions, because I know that some of us are using pretty cool extensions. But great question, Samantha.
I always learn a lot. I remember Sam was sharing us all of his extensions, and that was really cool. So there's some really good ones in there. So I'm gonna. I think I have the colorizer, but the other one I definitely want to install. That one's cool.
All right. Any more questions? We're approaching the end of the hour. So I'll just ask, out of all the new stuff coming into the browser as a whole, is there any particular feature, any particular spec that you wish we could have used in not just source code, but at GitLab that we didn't get to use, or you feel like it's an emergent thing and we need to think about it? I know that you already talked on the other AMA of making the web IDE work offline. So is there anything in particular that you've been feeling that we should have addressed or just leveraged in GitLab?
It's not necessarily new, but getting service workers, that'd be nice.
Yeah, use more service workers.
I mean, we need to at least use one. We don't use service workers at all. So Sam was looking at you making the service workers so that it would show the offline page. But I think it just got a bit stalled.
Yeah, he's giving a presentation today in London about that.
Yeah,
but we had one service worker in the web IDE, right? When we removed it.
No, so that'd be a web worker though.
Oh, yeah, true, right. It was a web worker.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, so I'll anything else that you've been feeling, oh, this is cool, I want to play with this?
No, but everyone should look at CSS Houdini, because like CSS Houdini is insane. Have you heard of it?
CSS Houdini?
Yeah. So it allows you to create these sort of like paint worklet type things.
Oh, to extend, is it to extend features?
Yeah. So you can get CSS properties and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's no way we could use that at GitLab. Unless you could maybe make it so that when you click the merge button, use the CSS Houdini paintlet to create like confetti or something. Or like an explosion. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I definitely, but is it already available to be used?
I guess in Chrome. But everyone uses Chrome anyway.
Cool. People, any more questions? No? Phil, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to voice?
Yeah,
Okay, so I guess I'll end here. And if you have more questions, Phil's gonna stay for a couple more days. So definitely reach out to him, ask questions. If not, reach out to me and we can find someone to answer those. Phil, thank you very much for enduring our onslaught of questions. It's always fun to learn how you think and how you've been working. So with that, thank you everyone. I'll see you in another call, and yeah, have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.